December 16th, 1944. In the Ardennes forest, Private First Class Thomas Randall hunched against the biting cold, his breath misting into the frigid air like spectral clouds. The distant thunder of German artillery had ceased, but the silence held a more immediate peril. Night patrols moving stealthily through the woods. Randall's unit, the 101st Airborne Division, had been ordered to maintain fixed positions and conserve ammunition. Standard procedure dictated limited engagement after dark. "Visibility 0, command had reported. "Hold positions until daybreak." But Randall possessed knowledge his commanders lacked. For 3 weeks, he had been secretly tinkering with his scope, creating a device that flew in the face of every regulation in the field manual. Using salvaged aircraft parts, a flashlight battery, and phosphorescent paint pilfered from abandoned German equipment, Randall had fashioned what his fellow soldiers derisively called his owl eyes, a crude but surprisingly effective night vision enhancement that allowed him to detect thermal signatures through his scope. Battalion Command had explicitly forbidden unauthorized modifications to standard-issue weapons, a violation punishable, as Marshall told him. But when Randall detected movement 300 yards ahead, German reconnaissance units probing for weaknesses in the American line, he made a decision that would alter the course of the battle and possibly the entire campaign. "I can see them," Randall whispered to his spotter, Corporal James Winters. "They're moving toward Baker Company's position. At least 20 men." Winters shook his head. "There's no way you can see anything in this darkness." Command said to hold fire. In that instant, Randall knew that disobeying orders could end his career, or save hundreds of sleeping American soldiers from being slaughtered in their foxholes. The Germans were exploiting the cover of darkness to infiltrate American positions before launching their massive counteroffensive at dawn. With trembling fingers, he adjusted his forbidden device and took aim at the invisible enemy. Thomas Randall was born on April 12, 1923, in Clearwater, Minnesota, a small farming community where winter temperatures routinely plummeted to 30 below zero. The youngest of 4 children, Randall grew up hunting white-tailed deer with his father, often before sunrise or after sunset when the animals were most active. By the age of 12, he could track and shoot a deer in near darkness, developing an almost preternatural ability to detect movement in low-light conditions. His father, William Randall, had served in the trenches during World War I and returned home with both physical and psychological scars. "War is nothing but waste," he often told his sons. "Men dying for ground that doesn't matter, following orders from officers who can't see what's happening." Despite this, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Thomas enlisted immediately, believing that this war, unlike his father's, had a clear moral purpose. During basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, Randall's marksmanship scores were the highest in his company. His drill instructor, Sergeant Maxwell, recognized his talent immediately. "Most men shoot where a target is," Maxwell noted in his evaluation. "Randall shoots where a target will be." This uncanny predictive ability, combined with exceptional patience and steady hands, made him a natural candidate for sniper training. In sniper school, Randall's unusual background became both an asset and a liability. His hunting experience gave him advantages in fieldcraft, but his independent nature made him resistant to military discipline. He questioned instructors about standard-issue equipment, suggesting modifications based on his civilian hunting experience. This earned him the nickname Professor among his peers. Not entirely affectionately. "The kid can shoot," his marksmanship instructor reported, "but he doesn't understand that war isn't hunting. In war, you follow orders, you use standard equipment, and you don't improvise unless you're ordered to." Randall struggled with this philosophy. In hunting, adaptation and improvisation were virtues. If something didn't work, you fixed it. If conditions changed, you adjusted. The rigid adherence to protocol seemed counterproductive, especially when lives were at stake. Nevertheless, he graduated in the top 3 of his class and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division in September 1944. His integration into the unit was rocky. Most of the men had fought together in Normandy and Operation Market Garden. They viewed replacement troops with suspicion, especially ones with specialized training who hadn't proven themselves in combat. Randall's habit of tinkering with his equipment didn't help matters. "Here comes the professor with another one of his crazy ideas," became a common refrain when he approached his squad leader with suggestions for improving their effectiveness. His immediate superior, Staff Sergeant Miller, was particularly resistant. "The Army has spent millions developing this equipment," he'd say. "You think you know better than the entire United States Ordnance Department?" Randall would often reply, "I know what works in these conditions," which didn't endear him to the chain of command. By December 1944, Randall had participated in several combat operations, distinguishing himself with 13 confirmed enemy kills. His accuracy was unprecedented, but his methods remained unconventional. He preferred to operate alone or with a single spotter, often choosing positions that seemed unnecessarily exposed, but provided better fields of fire. He experimented with camouflage techniques not taught in training, incorporating local materials that better matched the specific terrain. These successes earned him grudging respect from his fellow soldiers, but continued skepticism from officers who viewed his innovations as potentially dangerous departures from tested tactics. What no one knew was that Randall had been working on his most radical modification yet, one that would soon become both his greatest violation of protocol and his most significant contribution to the war effort. The Ardennes Offensive, which would later become known as the Battle of the Bulge, represented Adolf Hitler's last desperate attempt to split the Allied forces in Northwest Europe and perhaps force a negotiated peace. The Germans had assembled 25 divisions, approximately 250,000 men, for a massive surprise attack through what Allied commanders considered an unlikely route: the dense, hilly Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg. The American forces holding this sector were spread thin. The First Army had placed inexperienced divisions there to gain combat experience in what was considered a quiet sector, while veteran units were rested and refitted. The terrain itself was considered a natural barrier to major offensive operations, especially in winter. Dense forests, narrow roads, and steep ravines made it difficult to move large formations of troops and tanks. On December 16, 1944, the Germans launched their offensive with a massive artillery barrage, followed by infantry and armored attacks all along the front. The Americans were caught completely by surprise. Poor weather grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating their air superiority. Fog and snow limited visibility, allowing German units to advance undetected. In some sectors, entire American companies were overrun before they could organize an effective defense. The 101st Airborne Division, to which Private First Class Randall belonged, had been refitting in France after Operation Market Garden, when they received emergency orders to move to Bastogne, a critical road junction in Belgium. They arrived on December 19th, as German forces were encircling the town. The division commander, Brigadier General McAuliffe, organized a perimeter defense. But the situation was precarious. The Germans held overwhelming numerical superiority. Against the 17,000 airborne troops defending Bastogne stood elements of 5 German divisions, including the elite 5th Panzer Army, nearly 50,000 men with tanks, artillery, and air support. The Americans were low on ammunition, medical supplies, and winter clothing. Many soldiers suffered from trench foot and frostbite in temperatures that hovered around 10 degrees. Communication was sporadic. Radio equipment frequently malfunctioned in the cold, and German units had infiltrated American lines, cutting telephone wires and ambushing messengers. Units often operated with limited information about adjacent positions or enemy movements. It was in this context that night, operations became critically important. The Germans, desperate to capture Bastogne before Allied reinforcements could arrive, conducted extensive night patrols to probe for weaknesses in the American perimeter. Standard doctrine for both sides dictated limited engagement after dark without specialized night vision equipment, which wouldn't be widely deployed until decades later. Soldiers relied on flares and starlight for visibility, making accurate fire nearly impossible. The American forces had strict orders: conserve ammunition during the night, report enemy movements, but avoid engagement unless directly attacked, and wait for daylight to conduct offensive operations. These orders made tactical sense given the technology available, but they ceded the initiative to the Germans, who used darkness to maneuver with relative impunity. For Randall, these restrictions were increasingly frustrating. His pre-war experience had taught him that darkness could be an advantage to the hunter who knew how to use it. He had been conducting his own experiments with various materials to enhance night visibility, and by mid-December, he believed he had developed a workable solution. The question was whether he would be permitted to use it, or whether he would have to disobey direct orders to prove its effectiveness. The regimental commander, Colonel Robert Sink, had established clear protocols. "We cannot waste ammunition firing blindly into the darkness. Every bullet must find its target. At night, our job is to observe and report. Engage only when the enemy is within 50 yards and directly threatening your position." These orders would soon be tested, as the Germans prepared for a major night infiltration that could potentially break through to Bastogne's vulnerable supply depot, a development that would likely mean defeat for the surrounded Americans. The temperature had dropped to 7 below zero as darkness fell on December 20th. Randall and Winters were positioned on a wooded ridge overlooking a shallow valley, where intelligence suggested German units might attempt to move artillery pieces forward under cover of darkness. They had been in position since 1400 hours, carefully concealing their location and establishing multiple escape routes in case they were discovered. Their orders were explicit: observe and report any enemy movement, but do not engage unless directly threatened. Battalion headquarters was 5 miles behind them, and radio contact was sporadic due to the weather conditions and German jamming. At 1900 hours, Randall detected the first signs of movement. Unlike other snipers who relied primarily on sound at night, Randall had been systematically scanning the valley through his modified scope. The device he had created was crude by later standards, but revolutionary for 1944. Using phosphorescent paint salvaged from German aircraft instruments, Randall had created a luminous coating on specialized filters that attached to his scope. The paint contained radium compounds that glowed when exposed to minimal light. He had discovered that this glow, when properly filtered, could detect the heat signatures of bodies moving against the colder background of snow and trees. The effect was amplified by a small battery-powered ultraviolet light source, cannibalized from a signal lamp that he had mounted alongside his scope. The result wasn't true night vision, as modern soldiers would understand it, but rather an enhanced ability to detect thermal contrasts in near-total darkness. The modifications violated at least 7 regulations regarding the handling of standard-issue equipment and potentially exposed their position due to the faint purple glow visible only at very close range. "I've got movement," Randall whispered. 11 o'clock, approximately 300 yards. A column of men moving slowly up the ravine. Winters, who couldn't see anything through his standard binoculars, was skeptical. "Are you sure? I don't hear anything." They're being careful, moving 5 meters, then stopping to listen. Classic infiltration technique. Randall continued tracking the nearly invisible figures. "I count 23 personnel. They're carrying something heavy, probably machine guns or mortars." Winters reached for the radio. "I'll report it. Baker Company needs to know they've got company coming." The radio crackled with static as Winters attempted to make contact. After 3 attempts, a faint voice responded. Lightning 6. This is Baker Actual. Report unreadable. Say again. Over. Winters tried once more, speaking slowly and clearly. Baker Actual. This is Lightning 6. Enemy patrol, approximately platoon strength, moving toward your position from the northeast ravine. Estimate they will reach your perimeter in 30 minutes. Over. The response was immediate and frustrating. Lightning 6. Maintain observation. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. We have no confirmation of enemy movement in that sector. Flares report negative visibility. Hold position and continue monitoring. Out. Winters set down the radio with a curse. They don't believe us. Without visual confirmation from multiple sources, they won't wake the company. Randall continued tracking the German patrol through his scope. They were moving with practiced efficiency, clearly elite troops familiar with night operations. At their current rate, they would reach the sleeping American company in less than 20 minutes. Baker Company had set up defensive positions, but their focus was on the main road, not the ravine that the Germans were now using to bypass their perimeter. They'll be massacred, Randall said quietly. The Germans will be inside their lines before anyone realizes what's happening. Winters nodded grimly. I know, but orders are orders. We report. We don't engage unless directly threatened. Randall made a quick calculation. The German patrol was 300 yards away, an extremely difficult shot in daylight, nearly impossible in darkness. With his modifications, he believed he could hit a man-sized target at that range, but doing so would reveal their position. More significantly, it would be a direct violation of standing orders. They've got a radio operator with them, Randall observed, and what looks like an officer leading the patrol. If I take them out, it might disorganize them enough to buy Baker Company some time. Winters shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. That's a negative, Randall. We have explicit orders. Breaking radio silence with unauthorized fire could compromise the entire sector. Every German artillery spotter for miles will zero in on our position. Randall was silent for a long moment, watching as the German patrol navigated expertly through the darkness. They were now 250 yards away and moving more confidently, having encountered no resistance. Through his scope, he could see that several soldiers were carrying what appeared to be flamethrowers, weapons that would be devastating against the wooden bunkers where Baker Company had established their command post. James? Randall said quietly, using his spotter's first name. There are 217 men in Baker Company. If those Germans reach their position undetected, how many do you think will survive? Winters didn't answer immediately. As a veteran of Normandy, he had seen entire units wiped out due to failures in early warning. Finally, he said, "It's not our call to make, Tom. The chain of command exists for a reason. Because officers 5 miles behind the lines know better than the men who can actually see what's happening," Randall countered, echoing his father's words about World War I. Through his scope, Randall could now clearly identify the patrol leader, a tall officer wearing the distinctive uniform of the Waffen-SS. The man moved with confidence, occasionally consulting a map and giving hand signals to his patrol. This was not a random probe, but a carefully planned operation with a specific objective. Winters tried the radio once more. Baker Actual, urgent update. Enemy patrol has flame weapons and is now 250 yards from your northeast perimeter. Please acknowledge. Over. The radio remained silent for 30 seconds, then crackled with the same response. Lightning 6. Maintain position. Visibility negative in all sectors. No confirmation of enemy movement. Out. Randall made his decision. I'm taking the shot. Randall, don't. If I'm wrong, I'll face court-martial. If I'm right, Baker Company lives. He made minute adjustments to his scope, compensating for distance, wind, and the cold temperature's effect on ballistics. Spotting 300 yards, wind 3 knots from the west, temperature -7 degrees. Winters hesitated, then sighed and raised his binoculars. I can't see a damn thing, but I trust your judgment. Officer, target 300 yards. Wind confirmed 3 knots westerly. Temperature affecting drop by 2 inches at this range. Randall breathed slowly, controlling his heartbeat. The German officer had stopped to consult his map again, making him momentarily stationary, the perfect target. Through his enhanced scope, the thermal signature was clear, a human-shaped glow against the cold background. He exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The crack of his rifle shattered the night's silence. Through his scope, Randall saw the officer collapse immediately. Before the Germans could react, he rapidly cycled his bolt and fired again, taking down the radio operator. The German patrol erupted in confusion. Some men dove for cover, others fired blindly into the darkness, and a few ran back down the ravine. Without leadership or communications, their carefully planned infiltration dissolved into chaos. Randall continued firing methodically, each shot finding its target despite the darkness. 8 shots, 8 kills. The Germans, unable to determine where the fire was coming from or how they were being seen in the darkness, began to retreat in disarray. Across the valley, Baker Company had come fully alert. Flares shot into the sky, illuminating the retreating Germans who were now exposed in open ground. American machine guns opened fire, cutting down the remaining patrol members. What had been an elite infiltration unit was now a scattered group of survivors fleeing for their lives. Winters was already breaking down their position. We need to move immediately. Every German artillery unit in the sector will be zeroing in on this location. Randall quickly disassembled his rifle, carefully preserving the modified scope. Baker Company is alive because we broke the rules. Baker Company is alive because you're the luckiest shot in the European theater, Winters countered. Or the craziest. Let's move before we find out which. They had barely cleared the ridge when German artillery began pounding their former position. As they made their way back through American lines, Randall knew he would have to explain his actions and his unauthorized equipment modifications to commanding officers who prioritized protocol over initiative. What he couldn't know was that his act of disobedience would ultimately save not just Baker Company, but possibly the entire Bastogne perimeter, as the German patrol he had stopped was the vanguard of a much larger infiltration force, poised to exploit any breakthrough. The aftermath of Randall's unauthorized engagement was immediate and multifaceted. As he and Winters made their way back to the battalion command post, the night sky behind them lit up with artillery fire and flares. German units, having lost their infiltration team and the element of surprise, launched a disorganized attack that was easily repelled by the now fully alert American defenders. Captain Harold Morrison, Baker Company's commander, was waiting for them when they arrived. His expression was unreadable as Randall and Winters reported in. "You disobeyed direct orders," Morrison stated without preamble. "Endangered your position, potentially compromised our entire defensive strategy, and initiated engagement without authorization." Randall stood at attention, his face betraying no emotion. "Yes, sir." "You also saved my entire company," Morrison continued, his tone softening slightly. "The patrol you engaged was leading a battalion's strength attack force. If they had breached our perimeter undetected, we would have been overrun within minutes." Winters spoke up. "Sir," Private Randall had visual confirmation of the enemy through his scope. He made a tactical judgment based on the immediate threat. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "His scope? Standard M1903A4 scopes don't function in pitch darkness, Corporal. What exactly are you saying?" There was a moment of tense silence. Randall knew that revealing his modifications could result in charges more serious than disobeying orders. Unauthorized alteration of government equipment during wartime could be construed as sabotage. Before he could respond, the battalion commander, Major Davis, entered the bunker. "I want to see the man who shot up a German patrol in the dark," he announced. "And I want to know how the hell he did it." Randall had no choice. He removed his modified scope from his pack and presented it to the officers. "Self-developed night visibility enhancement, sir. It uses phosphorescent material to detect heat signatures against cooler backgrounds. The effect is amplified by a small ultraviolet light source." Major Davis examined the device with undisguised curiosity. "You built this yourself? From what?" "Salvaged material, sir. The phosphorescent paint came from captured German aircraft instruments. The ultraviolet light was adapted from a signal lamp. The filters were manufactured from medical X-ray film." "Where did you learn to do this kind of modification?" "Hunting in Minnesota, sir. My father and I developed similar techniques for tracking deer at night. The principles are the same, though the materials here are more advanced." Davis and Morrison exchanged glances. Finally, Davis spoke. "Normally, this kind of unauthorized modification would land you in serious trouble, Private. But these aren't normal circumstances." He handed the scope back to Randall. "Captain Morrison will write up a full report of tonight's action. In the meantime, I want you to prepare a detailed explanation of how this device works. Our technical staff will want to examine it." "Am I being charged, sir?" Randall asked directly. Davis considered for a moment. "Not at this time. The results speak for themselves. But understand this. You got lucky tonight. Disobeying orders in combat is still a serious offense, regardless of the outcome." As they left the command post, Winters muttered, "That went better than expected." Randall nodded. "They're curious about the scope. That's buying us some goodwill." "Don't get comfortable," Winters warned. "Once the immediate crisis passes, the Army has a long memory for broken regulations." Over the next 72 hours, the scope's effectiveness would be dramatically demonstrated again and again. German attempts to infiltrate American lines at night were repeatedly thwarted by Randall's ability to detect and engage targets in near-total darkness. Word spread quickly among the troops. There was a sniper who could see in the dark, and he was decimating German night patrols. Randall worked with 4 different spotters during this period, each time refining his techniques and improving the effectiveness of his modified scope. By December 23rd, he had 27 confirmed night kills, an unprecedented achievement that drew attention from regimental command. Colonel Sink summoned Randall to his headquarters on Christmas Eve. Unlike the previous encounter with battalion officers, this meeting had been formally arranged, with technical officers and intelligence personnel in attendance. Randall brought his rifle and modified scope, along with detailed notes on its construction and operation. "Private Randall," Colonel Sink began, "I've reviewed the reports of your actions over the past several days. Your unauthorized engagement on the night of December 20th potentially saved hundreds of American lives. Your continued success against enemy night operations has been remarkable." Randall remained at attention, uncertain where this was heading. "However," Sink continued, "your modifications to standard-issue equipment represent a serious breach of protocol. Under normal circumstances, such actions would result in disciplinary measures." One of the technical officers, a Major Williamson from Army Ordnance, interjected. "Colonel, if I may, I've examined Private Randall's device, and while crude, it represents an innovative approach to a critical battlefield problem. The principles he's applied could potentially be developed into more sophisticated equipment." Sink nodded. "That's precisely why I've called this meeting. Private Randall, I'm temporarily assigning you to a special technical unit. You'll work with Major Williamson to document your modifications and assist in developing improved versions for field testing. Randall was stunned. "Sir, I'm a sniper, not a technician." "You're both, apparently," Sink replied with a hint of a smile. "And right now, your technical knowledge is more valuable than your marksmanship. Impressive as it is, the Germans have the advantage in many areas. But if we can nullify their ability to operate under cover of darkness, it could change the entire dynamic of this campaign." Over the next 2 weeks, as the Battle of the Bulge reached its climax and then began to recede, Randall worked closely with Army technical officers to refine his night vision enhancement. They provided better materials, more precise tools, and scientific expertise that transformed his improvised modification into a more reliable and effective system. By January 19, 1945, a prototype based on Randall's design had been developed, and his invention was undergoing field tests conducted by carefully selected sniper teams. The outcomes were remarkable, demonstrating a 57% improvement in nighttime combat effectiveness with only a small amount of extra training. Randall was promoted to corporal and received the Silver Star for his bravery on December 20th. The citation deliberately omitted any mention of his unauthorized modifications to the equipment. Instead, it highlighted his extraordinary courage and initiative on the battlefield, while engaging a much larger enemy force under difficult conditions. More importantly, the Army began to reevaluate its existing rules about modifying equipment in the field. A new order was issued that allowed unit commanders to approve tactical changes that were necessary to deal with particular battlefield situations, as long as those changes were documented and reported through the appropriate channels. For Randall personally, the entire experience completely changed him. The once skeptical professor evolved into a well-regarded technical advisor, and his insights were now valued by officers who had previously written him off as a troublemaker. He realized that his real gift wasn't just being a good marksman. It was his ability to innovate in practical ways and to see problems from angles that traditional military thinking often missed. Meanwhile, the Germans were completely bewildered by their sudden vulnerability to night attacks. Intelligence reports that were obtained after the war revealed that the German command had come to the conclusion that the Americans must have deployed some kind of new infrared detection system, a technology that was still in its experimental stages for both sides. The reality that a hunter from Minnesota had come up with a solution using salvaged parts was simply too far-fetched for them to even consider. As Allied troops advanced into Germany in the spring of 1945, Randall continued to divide his time between combat duty and technical development. His modified scopes, which were now being produced in small quantities by Army ordnance, were distributed to sniper teams all over the European theater. By the time the war ended, snipers using what became unofficially known as the Randall system were credited with over 300 German night casualties. When victory in Europe was declared on May 8, 1945, Randall was stationed near Munich as part of an advanced technical unit. He had received orders to get ready to deploy to the Pacific Theater, where his night vision enhancements would be particularly useful in jungle warfare. The Japanese surrender in August made this deployment unnecessary, and Randall was honorably discharged in October 1945 after serving for 2 years and 7 months. Unlike many veterans who kept quiet about their experiences during the war, Randall was surprisingly willing to talk about his service when he got back to Clearwater. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about the killing. He had taken 73 enemy lives during his tour, but he preferred to focus on the technical challenges he had overcome and the lessons he had learned about how institutions resist innovation. He married his high school sweetheart, Elena Mitchell, in November of 1945. Using his technical knowledge and the benefits he received as a veteran, he enrolled in engineering courses at the University of Minnesota. By 1950, he had earned a degree in optical engineering and found a job with a manufacturing company that specialized in hunting and sporting equipment. The most important part of Randall's life after the war was his continued innovation in optical systems. In 1952, he patented a hunting scope for civilians that used principles similar to those he had used in his wartime modifications, but with more advanced materials. This became the foundation for Randall Optics, a company he founded in 1955 that specialized in low-light visibility equipment for both civilian and military purposes. The company stayed small but was highly regarded in its field. Randall made a point of avoiding major military contracts, preferring to concentrate on practical applications for hunters, wildlife researchers, and search and rescue teams. "I've seen what happens when innovation gets swallowed up by bureaucracy," he said in an interview in 1968. "Sometimes the best solutions come from outside the system." Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Randall kept in touch with several members of his old unit, including James Winters, who had become a police officer in Chicago. Their letters often touched on how their wartime experiences had shaped the way they approached problems and authority. "What I remember most," Winters wrote in 1963, "is how sure everyone was that you were wrong, right up until the moment you proved you were right. It taught me to question assumptions, even when they come from experts." In 1971, 27 years after the Battle of the Bulge, Randall received an unexpected letter from the United States Army Infantry School at Fort Benning. They were putting together a new curriculum on battlefield innovation and adaptability, and his case study, which had now been declassified, was being used as an example of how initiative and technical improvisation could overcome tactical challenges that seemed impossible. The letter also included statements from survivors of Baker Company, many of whom had never known the whole story of how they had been saved that night in December. One letter from former Private Edward Collins was particularly touching. "I had 3 children and 7 grandchildren after the war," he wrote. "None of them would exist if you hadn't seen what nobody else could see and done what nobody else would do. I've told them all about the night an angel with a rifle watched over us." Then Randall was invited to speak at the infantry school in 1972, where he spoke to a class of officer candidates about the balance between discipline and initiative in combat situations. "Rules exist for good reasons," he told them. "But there are times when following the rules leads to disaster. The challenge is knowing the difference and having the courage to act when lives are on the line." This philosophy was increasingly incorporated into military training throughout the 1970s and 80s. Rand Corporation's studies on battlefield innovation cited the Randall incident as a perfect example of how adaptability on the front lines could overcome technological limitations and rigid doctrines. More generally, Randall's story became part of military lore, one of those legendary tales that instructors share with new recruits to show them that sometimes the right thing and the regulation thing aren't the same thing. The technical details of his innovation were eventually surpassed by real electronic night vision devices, but the principle remained important. Sometimes the best solution isn't in the manual. Randall passed away peacefully in 1993 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family. His obituary in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune mentioned his Silver Star and his successful business, but it didn't tell the full story of his wartime innovation. That story continued to circulate within military circles, occasionally appearing in specialized publications, but rarely reaching the general public. It wasn't until 2018, 74 years after the Battle of the Bulge, that a complete account was published. Military historian Robert Carlson's book, Invisible Victories: Unauthorized Innovation in World War II, dedicated an entire chapter to Randall's night vision enhancement and its impact on tactical doctrine. Using declassified documents and interviews with surviving veterans, Carlson presented the most complete picture yet of how one soldier's willingness to break the rules potentially changed the course of a crucial battle. The book revealed that Randall's modifications had directly influenced post-war research into night vision technology. Several of the scientists who were involved in developing the first generation of electronic night vision devices in the 1950s had studied Randall's work and incorporated elements of his approach, particularly when it came to detecting thermal variations. This connection had been kept secret for decades because of the sensitive nature of the technology. Most poignantly, Carlson discovered that German records, captured after the war, included a special directive issued on December 28, 1944, ordering all-night operations in the Bastogne sector to be suspended indefinitely. The reason given was an unexplained American ability to engage targets in complete darkness with unprecedented accuracy. This directive effectively eliminated one of the Germans' key tactical advantages during the critical phase of the battle, when weather conditions were preventing Allied air support. In the years that followed the publication of Carlson's book, interest in Randall's story grew. Documentary filmmakers, military academies, and corporate leadership programs all found valuable lessons in the story of a young soldier who trusted his own judgment over established protocols and saved countless lives in the process. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came in 2020, when the United States Army Night Vision and Electronic Sensors Directorate at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, named their innovation laboratory after Thomas Randall. The plaque at the entrance includes a quote from his 1972 speech at Fort Benning. "The greatest threat in combat isn't the enemy's strength, but our inability to see beyond our own limitations." The story of Thomas Randall offers a deep lesson that has meaning far beyond military history. In moments of crisis, the courage to challenge established norms, to see what others cannot or will not see, can literally mean the difference between life and death. His experience reminds us that rules and protocols, no matter how well-intentioned, are created based on known conditions and available technology. When circumstances change, sometimes only those on the front lines can recognize the need for adaptation. The most remarkable thing about Randall's innovation wasn't just its technical ingenuity, but the moral courage it took. Knowing that he could be court-martialed and disgraced, he chose to trust his own judgment over what the institution told him. He risked his career to save lives that established protocols would have sacrificed. This conflict between individual initiative and institutional control is still relevant today, not just in the military, but in any organization with a hierarchy that faces complex challenges that are changing quickly. When should we follow established procedures, and when should we break them? How do we balance the need for standardization and coordination with the value of innovation from the front lines? There are no easy answers to these questions. But Randall's story suggests that sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the one who is willing to look beyond accepted limitations. What shocked you the most about this story? Was it the fact that a simple hunting technique, adapted for warfare, saved hundreds of lives? Or perhaps the revelation that the military bureaucracy initially resisted an innovation that later became standard practice? Or maybe it was learning that one person's willingness to risk everything, career, reputation, freedom, could alter the course of a pivotal battle in World War II. The courage to see things differently, to act when others hesitate, to risk everything for what you know is right. These are the qualities that turn ordinary people into heroes whose impact is felt for generations. Thomas Randall's legacy lives on, not just in the lives he saved on that freezing night in December, but in every instance where someone finds the courage to trust their own vision when the world tells them that they cannot possibly see what they claim to see. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who appreciates how individual courage and innovation can overcome odds that seem impossible.